the community. And then they were also concerned about digital billboards producing unwanted light spill that should not be allowed near residential neighborhoods or where people live. And they felt that by making an exception for the interstate locations, that they would be adequately separating those types of signs from the city's residential areas as opposed to having them on the public street. And then we went through this one other time, but Dustin, I think we do have the slide that shows the distinctions between the on-premise and off-premise signs. Not that one, the side-by-side comparison. And maybe we do not have it, but we did go through it at your at a previous meeting, but some of the distinctions is, the primary distinction is that an on-premise sign advertises a business on the property where the sign is located or goods or services are available. And so there's a much stronger association between the sign and the property, whereas an advertising sign or off-premise sign advertises a business not located or available on the property on which the sign is located. The other difference is that off-premise signs are regulated at the local, state, and federal level by the Highway Beautification Act. Digital billboards usually have a standardized rectangular dimensions. They are owned by billboard operators, and the space is leased to advertisers. And so those are the primary distinctions between on-premise and off-premise advertising signs. So the amendment that is put forward, and I think we have a draft of that, Dustin, or perhaps not, but the draft that you have in your packet, there, the terms, what the Planning Commission did is that they started with this and then they added a provision or an exception that would allow for such signs if they were located adjacent to interstate highways. And what they attempted to do was to allow for what the Highway Beautification Act allows for. And the way that the ordinance was drafted was to use the terminology that the state of Kansas uses in the Highway Beautification Act, so that the eligible areas where they would be allowed within the city limits would be consistent with what the state of Kansas allows along the interstate highway system. So with that, we just wanted to indicate that it would be helpful if you are in agreement with the Planning Commission's recommendation to articulate any reasons that you have that you find support for their position, and if given the opportunity, then we would insert those into the ordinance as findings between first and second reading. But we did want to give you the option this afternoon that you could, if you wish, approve this application and take action to approve it on first and second reading, given that the moratorium is scheduled to expire between your November 5th meeting or prior to that. If you don't wish to do that, then we would recommend that you approve whichever version of this ordinance you think is appropriate on first reading, with second reading being scheduled for November 5th. And then if you did that, you would need to approve an extension of the moratorium. And so you have two ordinances attached. One is to amend the text of the sign code. The other one would be to extend the moratorium. The third option would be to send this back to the Planning Commission and direct them to take a different approach. And because that would involve some major changes, you may want to consider extending the moratorium for a longer period to allow the Planning Commission to meet and consider the direction they receive. So the moratorium ordinance has multiple dates in it to allow you to choose what course of action you think is most appropriate.
Questions for Mr. Andrews?
I guess the only question I have is just in terms of the adjacency issue to interstate. How far does adjacency extend? I mean, meaning if you have property that's adjacent to the interstate, but it's like a really deep property, how far in can one of these signs be placed, if that makes sense? I mean, I assume the draw would be have it be seen from the interstate, but I just didn't know if that was something that would be best spelled out. I think Commissioner Good brought it up at the Planning Commission level, and it was thought that just adjacent was enough, but I didn't know.
Well, I'm afraid that you may get two different answers to that, depending on whether you ask a planner or whether you ask an attorney. But
well, the planner has the microphone, so I'm listening to the planner.
Our explanation to the Planning Commission was that we felt if the word adjacent was used, that our understanding of what that means and what is used throughout the zoning ordinance, that is adjacent means that the parcel the sign is located on must be contiguous with or share a common property line with the interstate right-of-way. The adjacent area that is in the state statute means an area which is adjacent to the right-of-way on any interstate or primary highway and is visible from the main traveled way. So on the advice of our council, we used that definition, and I think Dustin has it there. So when I see that and it says it's adjacent to the right-of-way, my interpretation is that it has to be on a parcel that is contiguous to or touches or has a common boundary with the interstate right-of-way, and it also provides that it's visible from the main traveled way. So I guess I will ask the city attorney if he envisions a scenario where you would have a sign that is visible from the main traveled way and is not adjacent.
Well, I think I was thinking about it actually being adjacent, but situated on a plot so that it was adjacent, say, not only to an interstate, but an area where a sign like that would distract, like a residential area. And maybe I'm just conflating the two or creating an issue where there isn't one, but that would be my concern, is if you had a lot that was very, very deep. I mean, say you owned 40 acres adjacent to the interstate. I mean, how deep within that 40 acres could you place your sign? Because it's all contiguous, or it's all adjacent.
The other approach, that's an alternate approach, would be to specify some minimum distance that the sign had to be from the interstate right-of-way. And that is another approach, and I think we had some discussions with council about that, but would you agree that that is an alternative to say that the sign must be located within some prescribed distance of the interstate right-of-way?
Well, I think that works. So I think that's the policy choice. And back to your first point, I don't think we disagree on
Greg, I don't think your mic's on either that, or we're having a...
I apologize. Well, quickly, I don't think we disagree on the two aspects of that definition under the state statute, both as to adjacency and the visibility. Excuse me. The visibility would seem to be a rather subjective component, and I assume that's a function of the size of the sign and the...
But you are, I mean, that is correct. You could have a 40-acre parcel that is adjacent to the interstate, and you could, if someone chose to locate the sign a quarter mile off the interstate, then there would probably potential to have a argument with staff about whether it was in fact visible or not, and then that becomes a more subjective test. So the alternative to that would be to say that the exception would be for signs located within 200 feet, 150 feet of the interstate right-of-way.
Right, because I don't have a problem with the signs being adjacent to an interstate. I just wouldn't want to, I'd rather err on specificity.
With this being in the city limits, does it not have to still be approved by city staff?
Yes, it would have to be approved by the only two billboard permits I've worked on. The KDOT took the approach of the city first, so I approved a billboard that's on the east side of I-135 north of Crawford for the Rolling Hills Zoo. That also had to be approved by KDOT. And then there's a new billboard that was put in near North Fifth Street and I-70 on the north side, and that also had to be approved by KDOT, but the KDOT wants the city to go first, and if the city doesn't approve it, they won't approve it.
But without verbiage as far as a number of feet, do we not still control where that would be to a certain extent?
I mean, I tend to agree with Commissioner Hodges that if it is visible from the main traveled way, there's no doubt that the parcel has to be adjacent. The question is, if someone wants to put up a sign 600 feet away or 660 feet away, which might be closer to the built-up area of the city, can we say, no, it's not visible, and they say, yes, it is, or we wouldn't put it there, then we're going to be arguing about whether it's visible.
Right, and if I can jump in, the conversation started with what does it mean to be adjacent, and I'm not a planner or an attorney, but if you just read that literally and take out the intervening language, an adjacent area means an area which is adjacent. That is circular in reference and ripe for confusion and controversy, along with Mr. Andrews' point that, if visibility is the standard, I could own a second-tier property and be visible while not being contiguous. So I think a literal distance is probably much easier to administer.
Dean, do you have a recommendation on
Yeah.
appropriate distance?
The one that we discussed was 200 feet, but it could be less. It could be 150 feet, but the most common one that I've seen from a distance standpoint is it has to be located within 200 feet.
That's cool.
The Planning Commission approved this language?
Planning Commission approved the language that the sign be located adjacent to an interstate highway, which we told them we felt meant that it had to be on a parcel that touched on or was contiguous with the interstate. But that doesn't address the other side of the situation, is how far can it be from the interstate while still being on a parcel that's adjacent. So
Can we
Logically,
approve?
they want to be as
Yeah.
close to the highway.
You would think. Can we approve this ordinance with the amendment of the footage and still do first and second reading today?
you can, if there are 4 affirmative votes for that.
Cool with that. I mean, I just see us as tightening up the language a little bit. I mean, it's not like we're introducing a completely new concept here.
No, the Planning Commission knew what they wanted to recommend, but we were amending the ordinance on the fly at the meeting, so that adjacent was the best term that we had come up with, and what we had pointed out to them as we did and you have in your packets a summary of different communities' approaches around the state, and both Newton, Kansas and Kansas City, Kansas disallow digital billboards except for, in Newton's case, within 300 feet of I-135. But I think if you wanted to push them closer to the interstate, then 200 feet is a more appropriate number.
What about the fellow that's got maybe his electrical service farther than the 200-foot limit? Are we going to constrain somebody from the placement of their sign and add?
He may need a solar sign. We do have solar-powered, we have a solar-powered billboard now that has, the prices for gas is powered by, the lights are solar-powered, so.
Or you can pay to move the infrastructure to the
Yeah.
sign.
Mayor, if I may, I had a question for Mr. Andrew. Are we speaking of a distance from the right-of-way,
From
the
the interstate right-of-way line.
And do we know about what that normally is from the paving? I just didn't know if everybody was thinking in terms of the distance relative to the roadway or the right-of-way of the interstate, and I don't know what that
Are you
distance.
suggesting it varies?
Well, I don't know that it, I
The
don't,
right-of-way width can certainly vary, so.
Yeah.
But
I don't know if they have a standard width. I'm sorry, I don't know that.
So would it be appropriate to say within 200 feet of an interstate highway roadway or an interstate roadway, to be more specific?
what's going to be easier to administer? I'm not sure we want staff out with a measuring wheel at the edge of the interstate.
It's much easier to measure from the right-of-way line than it would be to measure from the roadway.
So if the commission's okay with that, recognizing that could fluctuate depending on the right-of-way obtained by the Department of Transportation, that would be easier to administer.
The other thing with the roadway is that's an intended depth for that road's area. So if construction has to happen or a variety of other things, or work has to be done, that's the real width of that road, whether you see it or not. Sorry. It's a little wonky. Okay. Thank you.
Well, if we're picking an arbitrary number, I'd rather go with something somebody else was using, like Newton's 300 feet.
Yeah,
At least maybe they have some experience with it. And I would argue for a greater distance. Dennis?
Well, neither of the two billboard permits that we issued were that far away from the interstate. Both of them are closer than 200 feet from the interstate right-of-way line. So I don't think, even if it's at 200 feet, that there'll be any desire on anybody's part to be locating a sign beyond that.
All right.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Andrews?
Comment that we drive through Newton a lot, and their city is down below their interstate.
Mhm.
So their city's not right up on top, you know what I mean? It's over top of their city. That's my comment.
Is there anyone from the public that'd like to address this item?
Gary Gleason, Gleason & Sons Signs here in Salina. I thought I would just put some real simple stuff in here before the technical people come up. Usually when you put a billboard up, and you'll see them all along interstates and everything, the interstate has their property line, and it's always got the fence right on their property line. So whenever we put a billboard up, and this is what a billboard looks like, 48 by 14.
You're making me hungry.
And that's, so, look at it, oh. Let's put this one up. So that's what your billboard looks like. This is the property line of the interstate, and this is the owner's property. We always put these signs up just right on this fence line to get it out there as close as we can to the interstate. And without going over, because you don't want to go over the fence, so they'll make you move it. These are usually on one pole, and they're usually about, especially if we get the digital billboards in, the top of them will probably be about 40 foot to the top, which they'll be down where you can see them easy. And your regular billboards have got a vinyl cover on them. They're lit from the outside, shining back upon them, get a lot of light escaping around it. Your digital billboard is just like that. So I'm showing you the same one both, because they both light about the same. This one here is internally lit, and there's not any flow by on your lighting, and it's really, honestly, it's a little bit dimmer than your lights that shine upon it, which are bright, shining on it. So you don't really have a problem with lighting. And then on the interstates, you don't usually have a problem with any housing in the area. You also have, on the interstate, you probably have fewer of these than you do anywhere else. So, I mean, you don't have them stacked. You have like every 300 foot you can have one. With the LED sign, you will get a static sign, and it's just like your vinyl sign. It's not moving. When it changes, so you have no movement. So you get virtually the same thing with the vinyl sign as you do with this sign. And then, of course, your vinyl signs are legal right now, and the only thing that why these aren't legal, because they haven't been brought up before anybody to discuss it. So that's what we're trying to do, is just to get the LED sign legalized. And the main thing is, a vinyl sign, it'll take you 8 hours to change that copy. This sign here, you can change it every 2 seconds if you want to. But usually the rules for the interstate is about every 8 seconds you can make a change on your advertising. So now, before I let the other guys come up, is there anything I can tell you, simple questions?
Any questions?
No, I'm good.
Very
Thank you.
instructional. Thank you.
Gary stole some of my thunder. Trace Walker, 1608 Reese Road, Brookfield, Kansas, and I'm representing both Lighthouse and Salina 2020, and I'm reluctant to take any more of your time after this long evening. I appreciate your patience and your stamina. And I made this same pitch to the Planning Commission, and just to say that, you know, sales tax is a huge part of the city's budget, and so our idea, we're going to be seeking a permit for an electronic sign out on the interstate on I-135 with the idea of just advertising both businesses and community events and some of those treasures we have downtown, things going on at the community theater, things going on at the field house, things going on at the Arts Center. And so just with the idea of really helping us ensure that the downtown revitalization, people know about it. Thousands and thousands of people that are not from Salina driving by, and why would we not want them to know all about what we offer downtown Salina and really all over Salina. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Anyone else like to address this? Bring it back here to the commissioners. Can we take action on this?
If I could just ask real quickly, I'm happy to make a motion. What was the preferred language within, say, 200 feet of an interstate highway? Was that the preferred? As opposed, or did you want right-of-way in there? I couldn't remember.
I think it would be better if it was within 200 feet of the interstate highway right-of-way.
Okay.
And then again, your options would be to take first and second reading on that today, or to take first reading only and to extend the moratorium. But I said that you are within your discretion to amend the draft that we put together based on the Planning Commission's recommendation, because we were drafting that on the fly at the meeting, so.
Commissioner, do you have a motion for us? And then we'll deal with
Mayor-
compelling.
I'm sorry, may I
Uh-huh.
make a point quickly? We're staffing a little bit here. Am I correct that the objective is potentially to take final action this evening on first and second reading? And would it be helpful to go back to the slide that refers to those findings? Because the point is simply to be sure that as you're in a legislative mode, you're legislating, you're not in a quasi-judicial process, as I'm sure you're aware. But we are implementing anywhere other than on the interstate a ban of the signs. And then allowing them on the interstate. It would seem to be helpful, and not that we have to build them into whereas is necessarily in the ordinance or whatever, but I think the helpful thing in terms of your legislative act would be to look at those findings and conclusions and possibly, if you can, collectively articulate those that you believe warrant the ban that you are considering in the non-interstate areas of the city, and as well the distinction between how it is that we're making that distinction between the interstate and not, which all may be fairly obvious, but I think it's helpful if we have some acknowledgement in your deliberations this evening of what you believe to be the basis for what is generally a ban, and how, and the distinction between the basis for the ban and allowing them on the interstate. Does that make sense?
Reaction is 2, 3, and 4 on the left. Pedestrian traffic safety, aesthetic appearance, and property values, preserving and enhancing the appearance of the streetscape.
Yeah, I could go with everything that's listed up there. I mean, so if that needs to be part of the motion on the ordinance to affirm the materials presented by staff?
That would be very helpful, I think.
Boy, this motion's getting complex.
We already got the language.
Okay, well, I'm trying. Okay. Let me know whenever it's appropriate.
Go ahead,
All right.
Commissioner.
Mayor Ryan, I move that we approve on first reading ordinance number 18-10982 with the following change to section 42-512, changing the last phrase to accept advertising signs located within 200 feet to interstate highway right-of-ways, and affirming the purpose statements and the findings and conclusions for the ban as presented by staff.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes 5-0. Is there a motion to find a compelling public interest?
Mayor Ryan, I move that we should find the compelling public interest exists to allow first and second reading of the ordinance on the same day.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We will have a second reading. Could we have a motion for the second reading?
Mayor Ryan, I move that we approve on second reading ordinance number 18-10982
Is there a second?
Second.
We'll have a roll call then.
Commissioner Davis?
Aye.
Commissioner Hay?
Aye.
Commissioner Hodges?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick?
Aye.
Mayor Ryan?
Aye. That passes 5-0. Thank you all very much. We'll move on to 8-4.
8.4, resolution number 18-7612, authorizing the mayor to sign a license agreement with B&J Furniture LLC, doing business as Feldkamp's Furniture, to allow the installation of a private water line and sanitary sewer line within the public right-of-way on South 9th Street that would provide water and sewer service to the property located at 1930 South 9th Street.
Mr. Andrews again.
Here I have another request for you, and this is from Feldkamp's Furniture, or B&J Furniture LLC, that's doing business as Feldkamp's Furniture. And this location was originally Norris Furniture, and Norris Furniture was originally located downtown, and then in 1957 they relocated out to a new store on South 9th Street that was added on to 3 different times, and so the present store building is 36,000 square feet, and that store and property was purchased in 2011 by Feldkamp's. And surprisingly to me, and I think to most of city staff, it was determined that that store had never been connected to the city's water or sanitary sewer system. And they have a failing septic system and are bringing in water, and they find that not to be an acceptable situation to continuing operating there. So Feldkamp's contacted Superior Plumbing and came up with a plan to connect the store to the city's water and wastewater system. That involves extending a water service line from the building to a public main on the west side of South 9th Street and a sanitary sewer line north to a sewer in front of Suburban TV and Appliance. Both of these private service lines would be in the public right-of-way for 9th Street, and that right-of-way is generally reserved for public and franchise utilities. And the only exception to that is if the City Commission allows for private improvements in the right-of-way under the terms of a license agreement. So this license agreement request has come before you. We have contacted all the potentially affected public and franchise utilities. None of them are outright opposed, but they do have concerns about disruption to their fiber optic lines, to their buried electric and gas lines. And so they have expressed concern that staff will make sure that they utilize Kansas One Call to locate their lines, and the City Utilities Department's also requesting that they locate and expose all existing utility crossings before they commence work. So the attached license agreement for your consideration would authorize them to be able to install what would be privately owned and maintained water and sewer lines in the public right-of-way. And so their rights there would be subordinate to our public and franchise utilities, and all the costs would be borne by Feldkamp's Furniture. So it is our recommendation that you approve Resolution 187612, authorizing the mayor to sign a license agreement which would authorize these lines to be installed and allow this business to connect to the city's water and wastewater system.
Questions? Thank you, Mr. Andrews.
The license agreement states that they realize if they do any damage to any of the others, they're required to pay for that. Is there any kind of liability insurance required for them?
In talking with our risk manager, we will make sure that Boratech and Superior Plumbing are licensed, and they have to have a current certificate of liability insurance on file, and we will confirm that before they commence any work.
And will the license agreement be recorded in the Register of Deeds for?
It will.
Okay.
Yes, there's an Exhibit A that has the
Legal, I
legal
saw that.
description. It will be recorded against that description.
Thank you. Anyone from the public like to address this item? Bring it back here for action, please.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion, we approve resolution number 18-7612.
Second?
I moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item passes 5-0. 8.5,
Consider the acceptance of the offered utility easement and restricted access dedications from Salina Building Company, Inc. to serve the Tiger Express Edition.
Mr. Andrews.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. The Planning Commission has been very busy. When the Planning Commission's busy, they make you and your docket busy.
We regret you always have to wait till last.
This is a proposed one-lot plat of a property on the east side of Broadway, north of Crawford. And it's one of those about-time plats because there has been a number of divisions and re-divisions and split-offs of various parcels and uses here. But the plan is to take what is essentially 3 building sites, combine them into a single platted lot that Salina Building Company would then be able to sell to TERC LLC. And their plan, once the purchase is made, is they would remove the 3 existing buildings, construct a 5,000 square foot automated car wash in their place. It is a permitted use. They're not dedicating any more right-of-way, but they are dedicating utility easements, and they would be granting restricted access except for the 2 driveway openings. We did want to point out and have pointed out to them that there's no breaks in the median opposite either of those driveway openings. So the turning movements for the present time will be limited to right out, right in, right out only. They are aware of that. There is some work being done on a Broadway corridor plan, and that will information on that will come to you in December in a study session. But that corridor plan recommends eliminating the medians in some of the locations along this corridor. And so should that occur, then it would be subject to change. But we just wanted you to be aware that at the present time, this would be a right-in, right-only turning movement. They're actually reducing the amount of impervious surface on the site and increasing the green space. So they're actually decreasing the site runoff. All necessary utilities are in place, and the plat is essentially being done because the prospective owner will not purchase the property unless it is platted. So this is coming to you as a one-lot plat. The Planning Commission voted to approve the plat subject to 3 conditions, and if you concur with that, you should make a motion to authorize the mayor to sign the plat and accept the offered utility easement and restricted access dedications on behalf of the city. So you have the plat in your packet, and just for illustration purposes, we showed you there in your packets. There's a aerial photo with the site plan for the car wash imposed on it, so that you could see how that would situate on the site. So this is mostly a surveying and legal description exercise at this time, and so if you concur with the Planning Commission's action, then a motion to authorize the mayor to sign the plat would be in order.
Questions for Mr. Andrew?
I do just want to state I did a search on this. This transaction is being handled by a out-of-town, might even be in an out-of-state title company, but all I can say is, as a local title company, we're excited to see this being platted. We need that whole area platted, please. You don't do searches in this area, you don't understand why, but believe me, it's a mess.
So this will be one small step for platting.
Got to start somewhere.
Is there anyone from the public who'd like to address this item?
Thank you.
Thank you. If there's not, we'll bring it back here. Commissioners, is there a motion on this item?
Mayor Ryan, I move that we authorize you to sign the plat and accept the offered utility easement and restricted access dedications on behalf of the city.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 8.5 passes 5-0. Other business? Have we other business?
I had one thing really quickly. I wanted to acknowledge, I had a request from a citizen named Charlene Hamilton to read her letter into the record, and I'm hoping that, given the late hour of the night, that my fellow commissioners will just allow it to be included as part of the record. But Ms. Hamilton was specifically objecting to the downtown crosswalk structures. And it was a great letter, but it is fairly long, so if that's all right, I can pass that down, or whatever else we need to do at this point.
Do we need to take action to add it to the minutes? Is that what you're suggesting?
I think so.
I think if Commissioner Hodges read it into the minutes, that would inherently happen anyway, but I'll defer to the council whether we need a motion in a second to do that in this format.
It's a long letter, so I'm hoping that,
Okay, motion and second would certainly
and
be
it's
okay.
just, I'm getting a little punchy right now, so, and maybe that's something, I don't anticipate that our next meeting is probably going to be any shorter, so.
As much as we put them together, the staff hardly controls them. As Mr. Andrew indicated, the applications come and we process them, so.
Right. What would you prefer that I do?
Oh, that's a motion, I'll second it.
Yes, it is.
Been moved and seconded to pass Mrs. Hamilton's letter into the minutes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to that? Very
Thank you.
good. Sure.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I got a couple of things. I would like to follow up on that overhead structure part there. I was downtown when we had the streetscape, what do you call the, progress party. I took, along with Mr. Berrigree and talking to him, and then several citizens and I took a walk down the Santa Fe back and forth, and we agreed and disagreed and agreed and disagreed, and made some pretty good observations. And I've kind of had some second thoughts, and I'm thinking about if this would be, I won't know if you want to call it an appeasement or maybe something that we could look at. But I was wondering on the overhead structures, if we would get rid of two of those overhead structures and did one at where the alley is going to be located at, and then one down by where I think is First Bank and down in that area down there, and use those structures as a gateway into the downtown. With everything going on, I mean, that could probably save us $400,000 or $500,000 if we got rid of two of those structures. This way there, I mean, it would, it's not a complete, giveaway, but I mean, it's still, I mean, there's people out there that still would like to see these structures. There's a lot of people out there who would not like to see the structures. This is kind of a little bit of saying, what if we would do this, would this make a big difference? And I think using them as a gateway into the downtown, the way that the downtown streetscape's going to look, I think it'd really be pretty attractive to do it. Later on down the line, if we look at it and decide, maybe we need those other two structures, and, later on, maybe we can take a look at them again. But, I was just looking, like I said, there's some compelling arguments over down there. I mean, when you actually get down there and you stand there and you look, it makes a difference.
Oh, I'm just speaking for myself. I mean, I think you all know where I'm coming from, but I think 2 would be better, definitely better than 4. I think that's a good compromise. And I think that way we get to see more of the downtown building facades. So take it for what it's worth, but I think it's a good idea.
Well, I have to say, saving $500,000 isn't a bad idea, and I kind of like the gateway thinking of it, as we talk about the gateway, identifying the gateways and that.
Yeah, I'm downtown probably more than anybody, and probably even have a different thought process. And again, I think we need to see how the study comes in on the star bonds. I've talked to several merchants and individuals that have businesses down there, and they really are, the merchants down there kind of like them, the idea of the ones I've talked to. So you start looking at, do you want them as an entryway, or do you want them on the blocks that are busier? Crossing the street without those the other day, you might as well cross in the middle of the street. It's a little dangerous. I mean, it's I just being honest. So they probably do serve a purpose of slowing traffic down. I'm not sure who makes that call as to, do we put them on the north and south end? Do we put them on block 100 north and 200 south? I don't know who makes that call if we go to 2. So, I know, does that, go ahead.
Well, no, we've talked about it before, and I hope you took away that it's a possibility that, right. There's some things to think about. Have the conversation, but it did express there's quite a bit of a design process that was going through, and concerned about at least going through another process before we just change it for fear of people feeling like they had commitments made. You raised the point of there is a traffic calming factor to it in terms of constricting it, or at least creating a focal point where people are looking and can cross. Plus, with the new configuration, we've tried to narrow it down to 3 lanes and have bump outs at those overhead structures to encourage pedestrians to go there. But that's not to say that that can't be accomplished in some other way. And then I'm no artist, but as Brad, and we've talked about this in the executive staff on occasion, and Brad Anderson made a point that was pretty compelling to me, and that was that without that horizontal break, your focal point is pretty high on that down the way, and having that horizontal break actually draws your attention back down to the storefronts, which I guess I could see that point. But having said all of that, I think that was all 6. It's certainly something that we could. Oh, I know it wasn't. That was 5. The other one I was going to tell you is my thinking originally was with the star bond consideration today. That will be an opportune time to talk about kind of the finances of that, because if you recall, the way the entire star bond deal is structured, the last $2 million of star bond proceeds are what fund the city's streetscape work, including this project. So, if we're lucky enough to have full star bond funding, then the savings that might be realized is just downsizing that star bond issuance. And until we have numbers for you, I can't say for sure whether it looks rosy in that star bond increment that we'll capture for that purpose, or whether there's a real need to downsize the bond sizing and start looking for savings. And then I guess one additional point is they're not all the same. One of them is larger than the others, and so depending on which ones you choose, that might impact the cost savings. And I don't think it's 1 for 1. Just because we're taking out 2 doesn't necessarily mean that, given where we're at on the project, we'll realize a 50% savings. And I know Jim's been working on the contract, both in terms of with the contractor and talking with legal counsel about exactly what our options might be with respect to the contract, so I'm going to put him on the spot a little bit.
Yeah, we, after the last commission meeting, we have looked into it to see what the expenditures are, the contractor's expenditures are to date on the overhead structures. And we are talking just about the overhead structures and not the overhead canopy in Campbell Plaza. We're looking at that as still needing to be done either way. But for the 4 overhead structures, the contract value is just under $1.5 million. There is one that is quite a bit longer than the other 2 because it is at an angle. There are 3 that are at right angles and one that is skewed. So it's not just well, if we eliminate 2 of them, it's half or $750,000. But the contractor said until he really knows, because we had heard both, that you wanted to maybe include leaving the end ones up or include leaving the 2 internal ones up or maybe just putting 1 in. And he said until he really knows what you're wanting, he can't really give you a cost savings. But he does know the major expenditures with the steel supplier are approaching $500,000. And that is spread over all 4 structures because they're working on them. So chances are he would need more information to get you an estimate. And if you are interested in, it sounded like there was maybe consensus with the 2 exterior blocks, leaving those in the project. If that's what you want us to get an estimate on, that can be done. But the contractor does have a notice to proceed. He's working on it. Your savings go down every day. But I think you're real close in that kind of that ballpark estimate that half is $750,000. We've spent about a $500,000 on 4 so far. So that's roughly $125,000 apiece. You take your 375 minus 125, it gives you about 250. That if you right now you're in the ballpark. I'm say ballpark. If you underrun them, you could save $500,000. So the longer we wait, the less we're going to save because they're still fabricating them.
I had asked the last time, and I guess I'll ask again, is it possible to get some type of rendition of what these options would look like? I mean, just...
Yeah, they don't exist, but they can be
right. I mean,
created.
I don't know how easy it is. I guess we see them so frequently here. It just looks like it's easy for somebody. I mean, I wouldn't know how to do it. But
You mean an actual photograph with the overhead structure inlaid into the exact location? I mean, we have renderings that are just kind of watercolor.
Right, because the one picture we had the last time shows that block just south of, I guess, Ash, with the street the way it is now, not the new street.
Mm-hmm.
And just sitting there, so it's not really the way it would look once the street was redone.
It's certainly possible, and I don't know that the designers, well, I think we'd start with the designers that did the streetscape in the first place, and
it's easily done, and we would have to pay our designer, our consultant to do it, but it's something that could be done in a relatively short period of time.
With that, I'd like to see us try to pursue whatever we can to see what's the option is then.
Okay. Well, staff can certainly staff it through. I think you might want to think about public process as well. But we can get started on, researching cost savings, and if you'd like, having some renderings prepared.
I, for one, hate to make aesthetic choices, but I'd want to know what our bigger stakeholders, the bid and 2020, say about just the general idea, and then the location of them as well.
And I guess my question is, and I'm not sure who was involved in that, when we had the process of doing the streetscape, and we had all the meetings, and I'm guessing people knew that we were doing 4 or 2. I don't know how those conversations went.
That certainly was the communicated conclusion. So in my conversations with Salina 2020, that was the concern, was at least
I'm thinking about all the citizens that were involved, and so
I share that concern. But I guess I'm not certain that the idea of just having 2 as opposed to 4 was really considered by everybody. So
We need to anticipate the DRB being involved.
I was just going to ask about that. There's a DRB meeting on Thursday afternoon, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
That's not on their agenda, though. They're dealing with a pattern
Right.
Well,
Right.
I was told it was on their agenda. I got a phone call.
Actually,
On their agenda, but the
Yeah.
items that are up, kind of like how we just talked about with the sign regulations, the items that are there to discuss are the fabrication changes that you guys
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Set back to them.
4 to 3,
Right.
and the columns.
in fact, we want to be very deliberate with the DRB that they're not being asked to decide do they want overhead structures or not, and how many and where. It is strictly the question that Ms. Driscoll described, with the rest of that to be decided later. I don't know that they need to sign off on not installing something that doesn't exist. They only need to sign off on the aesthetics going forward. So we'll get started staffing that through then.
Since we don't have a meeting next week, I mean, it's going to be a full 2 weeks before we're going to be able to take another look at this. Do you have another, and like Mr. Kowach said, every day is costing us money. Is there any way to put a pause on where they are at in the process at this point, or what?
Well, it's one of those, it's a double-edged sword. If you ask them to slow down, they've already been slowing down, that they could ask for more money later because you slowed them down, or if you tell them to go ahead and move forward and then you decide not to do something, you may have spent money on something that you really didn't want.
I guess the one thing we could do is see if they can concentrate their efforts on one structure. And we'll just have to have a conversation with them to see if
I
there's a
don't know
way to be
exactly where
strategic.
they're at in the overhead process. We haven't approved the panels yet because that was, or the columns, because that was subject to DRB approval, but they are fabricating the 4 trusses and have ordered the materials for the panels for all of the structures, and we're looking into whether or not we would be able to not buy that or restock it, or what the options are. But
Which one's the angled one?
the angle one is it Campbell to,
Yeah, 100 block of south. isn't
Yeah.
it? 100 block of south San Jose.
yeah, it's right there by Coops.
Yeah.
It's the one that's at an angle. It's it's wider and taller. It was a double structure before we took it out, but
Commissioner Hay, did I hear you say you had a couple things?
Yes, I got one other thing.
Hear me snoring.
I'm sure all of you have got many, many emails. I've got a lot of phone calls. I've had a lot of conversations. I've come to a conclusion, and I don't know if anybody else has, but, accidents happen. Marcy Mobley, she has fostered countless dogs and fostered countless animals without any report of any other abuse at all or anything. With all the phone calls and the people I've talked to and everything, my opinion, I would like to see her have another chance and reinstate her foster status at the shelter. I don't know what my other fellow commissioners think, but I just think like I said, we all make mistakes. I know myself with the dogs I've got at home. I've had the grandkids or even our children playing with the dogs, and accidents happen. And I just would like to, it's just something I like to see get put behind us and see if we can get this taken care of.
Two questions. When you say accidents happen, you're referring to whom?
The accident that she was taken off of the foster list because of the so-called rope tied around the muzzle of the dog.
Right. So you're implying that happened under her watch, whether she did it deliberately or not. I'm just want to know for sure that what the accident is. But that's what I thought you might be talking about. Because then my next question would be, is this still being, I'll use the term loosely, investigated by staff?
The honest answer is I don't know that there is a process. Part of what NACA pointed out in their report to us is the lack of, I'm going to say, institutional control. That's an NCAA term, but a lack of organization and formality with some of the structure. And so what I've been able to piece together is we have a visiting vet that comes in to do spay and neuters, and they're consulted for their expertise. We have the Friends of the Shelter, who I'm learning more and more about what they do as an organization, what they do as individuals, and they play a large role in making decisions about foster care. And in this particular instance, the dog came in, the injury was there, whatever it is, was noticed. The vet made a recommendation. Staff relayed that recommendation, and the recommendation was specific to the dog in question. That was relayed by staff unbeknownst to me, and I don't know exactly how it was relayed, and that resulted in asking for dogs that had been fostered out over the weekend by the Friends of the Shelter to be brought back. So I meet with the Friends of the Shelter tomorrow evening. One of the things I intended to take up with them was the process, and I don't know that they're in a position to have formal authority to make a revocation decision, but it does appear that they're making placement decisions. And so, in all honesty, I'm trying to work.
They decide who's fostering.
They'll decide a dog that needs to be fostered, and then make arrangements to place it in a foster home. There is paperwork associated with that goes through the state as it's associated with foster homes, but in all honesty, Chris Cotton, Scott Gary, and myself are trying to figure out a lot of things relating from software to invoices to just the day-to-day operations. And so the way this played out was identification of the dog, recommendation by the vet, carried out by staff and Friends of the Shelter, and as in the information that I provided you, I followed up with the vet for a couple of reasons. Frankly, she provided a letter with an electronic signature, and I was concerned about being accused of forging that letter, so I wasn't going to use it until I had it signed. I went and met with her the Tuesday after the City Commission meeting last Monday. She was very adamant that I explained to her everything that's going on as it relates to the animal shelter, and I want to make sure before I quoted her or relied on her professional opinion that she was aware. Her response was, I don't care about the people, I care about the animals, and that never should have happened to that animal. And so I then relayed Ms. Moberly's explanation and indicated that in the interest of being objective, what I would do is have a staff person transcribe Ms. Moberly's comments and email them to the vet, which I did. She then provided the letter that you received, which indicated that she conferred with 3 other vets, and she remains convinced of her opinion. That all relates to the dog in question. With respect to our process to select, to approve, select, oversee, and reprimand foster placements, I don't know that any of that's really ever been addressed by the Animal Shelter Organization before.
Is there a plan to formalize the chain of command between our city staff and the Friends of the Animal Shelter? Because it seems like they're two...
Right. I am convinced that, and NACA acknowledges it as well, the assistance that the Friends of the Shelter provide is vital, and I'm convinced it's the only way that shelter is a no-kill shelter. But having said that, the NACA report acknowledges that no-kill status in and of itself is not necessarily the end goal as you make some of these other hard decisions. And so they call out a number of concerns as it relates to just the operation of the animal shelter in general and the role of the Friends of the Shelter. I'm trying to tread as lightly as I can to transition from Vanessa Cowie to not only a new supervisor, but possibly a new organizational structure without alienating the Friends in the process and ending up with making it worse instead of better. I think I made the comment to Ms. Moberly, I've made it to others. I would love for this merry-go-round to stop just long enough to get off, but all the comments and the innuendo, and I'm spending all my time tracking down verbal conversations more than I'm spending trying to address the NACA recommendations and what needs to be done at the animal shelter. Now, having said that, Chris Cotton and Scott Gary are over there on a regular basis dealing with getting them the tools that NACA recommends and getting bids on replacing the fence. And what I told them to do was collectively with the interim shelter director and staff, take all the NACA recommendations and inventory them, take all the other feedback from staff and inventory that, and then let's start to prioritize so that we're not just diffused and headed in too many directions. That's what they're currently working on, other than immediate. I mean, we had someone make a change to the software and it totally deleted our agency today. So now we're trying to get our information back. Now, I believe it's a staff person, but I also found out that volunteers have access to the software in the building and remotely by phone. I mean, there's so much going on that we are trying to get our arms around over there. So
I would just like to say, Joe, I appreciate that effort, but that's not something I ever expect to happen again, and I understand the chaos that's going on right now, but I truly do. You and I both know that nothing was done to that animal intentionally. But in saying that, I did talk to Mr. Scragg, and I listened to what he said about the NACA report, and I've worked in a school environment for 10 years. I've worked with the records. I didn't have access to everything like what he's talking about happened. There's no way that's something I mean, I don't know about every volunteer that enters photos, but I could never do that. I could enter a photo and I could type whatever I learned about a dog, like if they write it on their kennel cage, I could type that on their kennel card or the biography, so that then could pop up on the screen when somebody went to look and see if they wanted that dog, if it was good with kids or if it was good with cats. And then, you know, we've discussed about maybe some of those things not being done quite the right way, you know, and things needing to be done. And I agree. I agree that I can see how things that are not safe for the city or the city could be a liability at, that the volunteers have just always done, and that's just how it's been forever. So I agree things need to be fixed and be changed. I don't necessarily agree with how things have been done up to this point, and I've made myself abundantly clear on that. But I totally do agree that things need to heal and things need to be fixed so that both the staff, the volunteers, and the liability for the city is covered, because I can look at what he was talking about and relay it back to my job and how I had to protect records and how I had to, you know, I had information that was not okay for other people to have, and that was my responsibility to keep to myself, and I did that. And so I can see where he's coming from and not wanting to alienate volunteers, because it's going to be a big change. It's going to be a lot of changes, and it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard on a lot of people. So I hope that everybody will stick with it and continue to volunteer and really do good things for the shelter, because in the end, that's what it's all about. But I do appreciate you, Joe. I appreciate you bringing that up. But I totally understand where everything's at, and we'll just wait and see what the other vet says. And in reality, it doesn't matter, because somewhere out there's somebody that does need me to foster them, and I'll do that. So thank you.
I would like to thank you also, Joe, for bringing that up. And I just wanted to say, as the parent of a pug who had part of his ear bitten off by our other dog, I do understand that accidents happen. And so when you see me out walking my ragtag pug, I hope I will get the benefit of the doubt.
Just so we're clear, I'm not accusing you, Ms. Mobley. I never have.
I'm not saying that, no.
Staff hasn't either.
I just think that that's not, I mean, it's irrelevant to me at this point.
Well, I just want to explain the process and why it played out the way that it did. I mean, at the point that the animal came in looking like it did, and it got the attention of staff, they went to our vet. And, you know, I don't even know that we have a form.
Your staff, it went directly from my husband's hands to your vet.
Okay.
She said what happened to its nose, and he said, I don't know. We have
Okay.
we haven't seen that.
So, and I don't even know that we have a contract with a vet to identify their role. I mean, what I know about the payment process is we have to deviate from our current payment practice to make payment the day of, and that was an arrangement that we're continuing to honor. But my point, I guess, is they're relied on as the subject matter expert, and in the intervening time, I suggested that if need be, we could get the opinion of an objective third party, just to leave that vet out of all
Chaos.
this angst. And my whole intent was objectivity and in fairness and respect for their professional opinion. And you have you have both rounds of correspondence from the vet that caused staff to proceed in the way that they did.
I do want to, the other thing I wanted to mention is I am licensed with the state through both the animal shelter and through SRL. So there is, when he's talking about paperwork, I am licensed with both the state. And what I learned is as a volunteer, I do know more than they do about the shelter. And that needs to be corrected. I mean, and that's going to be a growing, learning process. And that's kind of what he's talking about, I think. There's just things that aren't even, not that I, you know what I mean, there's just things that happen and the process they happen that you have to be in that environment and go through that daily process to see what it is and know whether, and I looked at it as, I'm a volunteer, what do I need to do, how do I do it, okay, let's go do it, let's then go home. And I did bring photos on at home. I uploaded them at home. That was just easier. I'd go home and edit them and upload them at home. Because the internet in the volunteer room is too slow, and I have 2 grandkids that I need to keep track of, and I don't want to do that at the shelter. So.
And I don't have an opinion about much of that yet. I mean, other than I've shared with you that I think what the Friends are doing is vital to supplement the operation of the animal shelter. You also received some information last week about the adoption age of dogs. Well, what I was able to figure out with the assistance of Greg and Mr. Cotton Friday evening was there are Kansas administrative regulations, but that policy, what took place is not a deviation at the direction of me or Chris Cotton or Scott Gary. It is the performance of the animal shelter as it has performed in the past, and as people want to criticize or correct or whatever their motivation might be, it's one more question we have to track down. The reality of it is we don't know the birth date of those dogs. They're stray dogs, and so they get brought in. We rely on the vet to make a determination of are they ready to be spayed or neutered, and then once they're spayed or neutered, we market them for adoption. Now, that staff person has been talked to and acknowledged that they just were doing a Facebook Live video and shouldn't have said that the dog was 6 weeks old because they didn't know how old the dog was. But is that something that employee deserves to be reprimanded over? I don't think so. Did we violate the Kansas administrative regulations? I don't think we did that either. But if you go look at software, there might be a date in there for the birth of the dog. I have no idea where that date came from. It could have been someone's best guess.
That is exactly what it is.
So then to be held accountable for that best guess in terms of the department head leading the department in the wrong direction and deserving to be terminated is completely unfounded, in my opinion.
And we have different opinions of how, that's what I said, I am at a point where I'm listening to you. And I've listened to what you said, and I agree, there's things that do need to change. But we're always going to differ on certain things, and that's okay.
I understand, but it needs to have merit in terms of if we knew all along that date is not a realistic date, I won't hold any of my employees accountable for that. That's unfair.
If you had adopted that dog out advertising it as 6 weeks old, then that would have been, you could have broken the state statute, yes. Had you not been made aware of it.
Correct, and I just said that the staff person acknowledged that they shouldn't have speculated about the age of the dog at all. I mean,
Your vet is who put the date, though, and thought it was old enough to stay. Correct?
correct. And once again, we're at a level of detail in terms of the past operation of the shelter that's going to have to change, that's going to take not only a lot of time and energy, but a lot of patience and some really solid leadership. And that's what we're trying to do.
Well, I'm still confident that staff has all the best intentions. We just have an administrative and policy gap there. We're going to get to the bottom of it. But it's going to take a little bit of time. I mean, there's some structure.
I don't know of any
that needs to be developed.
Sorry to interrupt. I don't know of any other operation in our organization that's as frenetic and has so many people coming and going. And I mean, and not to say that others aren't up there with it, but it's unique and
Friends and volunteers and a lot of passion all mixed together make
and just pace of work and foot traffic and yeah, there's a lot of challenges over there.
Well, when you meet with them tomorrow, when you meet with the Friends of the Animal Shelter, please thank them for all the hard work that they do on behalf of the animals of Salina. And
I definitely will. I'm fearful that this conversation or rumors about this conversation or the NACA report are going to cause friends to think that, there's an adversarial relationship there when that doesn't have to be the case. We're trying to, and I've counseled staff, we have to pick the changes we're going to make. We make too many changes all at once, and we're going to run everybody off. We have to be very deliberate as we transition so that we can maintain the friends and what they're doing for us.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
so moved. Oh, second then.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Good.